The last thing that we have to do inside of our project is write a little script to take our contract, so our inbox contract right here, compile it, and then deploy it to a real test network. And that's kind of conflicting when I say that, real test network, but basically I want to deploy this script or this contract out to the Rinkeby network. In this case, we're going to deploy to Rinkeby, but we could just as easily deploy this to the main network. We're only using Rinkeby because remember, we have to pay real money to deploy our contracts, and I'm going to assume that you probably don't want to pay money to deploy this thing right here. Once you learn how to deploy a contract to Rinkeby, it's the exact same process to deploy it to a main network. So we're going to get some pretty good knowledge right here. The process of actually doing the deployment is going to involve some code that looks very similar to what we did a moment ago inside of our test file. So here's our before each statement inside the test file. Remember, we created a new contract. We then called deploy on it, and then we called send on that. So eventually we're going to do the same thing as we did right here. But there's going to be just a little bit of added difficulty because you and I need to kind of understand exactly what is different between deploying to a local test network where all of our accounts are unlocked and open for access versus a real network where we have to somehow get an account that has some amount of ether in it already. So in this video, we're going to take a look at a complicated diagram that's going to help you understand exactly how this deployment process is going to work. The first thing I want to do here is remind you about the concept of the Web3 instance and the provider. So we've got an instance of Web3, which is our portal to all things occurring in the Ethereum world. And a Web3 instance doesn't operate on its own. We have to set a provider on the instance, which is how Web3 communicates with some given network. So again, you can imagine that this provider kind of gets inserted into this Web3 instance like so. So I want you to keep that in mind for just a moment, because we're going to look at another diagram that's going to add a couple more pieces to this puzzle. Okay, so here we go. So like I said, a couple more pieces here. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this diagram, and then we'll take that knowledge and apply it in our deploy script in the next video. So we're going to start off at the right-hand side and talk about what is similar about deployment to a public test network and what is dissimilar. So just as before, we're going to use a Web3 instance to facilitate our deployment process. We're going to create the instance, we're going to shove a provider into it, and that provider is going to tell our instance exactly what network it is supposed to be communicating with. Now this time around, there's one big difference here between deploying to the test network and deploying to our local network. That big difference is the fact that this time around, we have to make sure that we are using an account that has some ether on this test network or on the Rinkeby network. So before we just said, hey, take some account that was pre-generated for us, some account that is already unlocked on our Ganache local network, and just go ahead and do the deploy. And you and I didn't have to worry anything about security or private keys or public keys or anything like that. But this time around, again, we're using a real account here. We're going to spend some kind of fake, but also kind of real ether to do this deployment. So this time around, our provider needs to have an account that it's going to use as a source of ether for the deployment. To do that, we're going to take what's called our account mnemonic. The account mnemonic was that 12-word phrase that was provided to us by MetaMask when we first created our account a while ago. So you'll recall when we created an account, it said, hey, here's your mnemonic, it's 12 words, write this down and don't lose it, because it is the only way to unlock your account. So that account mnemonic is kind of a stand-in not only for your public key, but also the private key. In just a little bit, we'll talk about exactly what the mnemonic does for us, but essentially that mnemonic can be used to unlock your account and use the ethers within it to deploy a contract. So we're going to take that account mnemonic and pass it to this provider that you and I are going to create. Previously, we used a provider that was given to us directly by Ganache. And so that provider already had some of those accounts or this account information kind of installed inside the provider. So the big difference here is that this time around, we don't get those automatically created accounts included in the provider. We have to set that thing up ourselves. So we're going to take the account mnemonic and shove it in there. Now the next big difference is that once we start attempting to deploy to the Rinkeby network, we need to make sure that we have some node that we can connect to actually deploy our contract. Remember, whenever we think of the Rinkeby network, it's not just this one singular box, as I've kind of depicted it here, that we are connecting to. We have to connect to a very specific node. Well, maybe not specific node per se, but we have to connect to a node that exists inside the Rinkeby network. One of the common solutions you'll see around this is to run a local node on your own machine. So a real Ethereum node that connects to the Rinkeby network. And you can then use that node running on your machine to deploy your contract. However, that's a process that takes a lot of time and a lot of difficulty to set up. So rather than using a local full Ethereum node, which would take us a lot of time and a lot of effort, we are instead going to use a service called Infura. Infura is a public API that we can sign up for. It gives us the ability to get access to a node that is hosted on the Rinkeby network by Infura. Essentially, think of Infura as being our portal beyond Web3 into the Rinkeby network. The company that runs this Infura API also has nodes that are available on the main network, on Ropsten, on Kovan, and basically all the public networks involved with Ethereum. So it's a very easy way to get started with deploying and accessing the network. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's some of the different pieces of the puzzle. Now, as usual, I've given you a little bit of a high-level overview here, and we haven't gone too far into the details just yet. Because if we went through the details, well, this would be a 20-minute lecture, of course. So a lot of the skills and knowledge we're going to pick up here is going to be in the form of actually writing this code out and seeing how it all works. So let's pause right here. We're going to continue in the next video, and we're going to start to set up some of these different pieces inside of our deployment script. So I'll see you in just a minute.